Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're diving into a really fascinating and honestly kind of terrifying psychological mystery. We're looking at the absolute brightest minds among us, brilliant tacticians, seasoned corporate execs, intellectual heavyweights. And we're asking a surprisingly simple question. Why does having high intelligence completely fail to guarantee good judgment? We're going to explore the hidden traps in human decision-making and figure out how we can actually save our minds from themselves.
So does a high IQ mean you make better decisions? Let's jump right into this because the answer is honestly shocking. We all naturally assume that if you have a massive IQ, you process information better and therefore you make the right calls. Makes sense, right? But the reality is a total paradox. In high-stakes environments, highly intelligent experts systematically make terribly flawed choices. They stick to failing strategies, they completely ignore obvious warning signs, and they somehow justify absolutely catastrophic leaps in logic. The real question is, how can someone be that smart yet act so predictably foolish? Well, the scientific consensus gives us our first major clue. Basically, we've fundamentally misunderstood what intelligence actually is. Think of intelligence and rationality as two totally different characters living inside your brain. Intelligence, that's your raw processing power. It's fantastic at spatial skills, complex math, and rapidly spotting historical patterns. But rationality, that's the critical thinker. It's the mechanism that actively seeks out balanced views, objectively evaluates evidence, and fights off bias. And here's the kicker. Having a massive amount of intelligence does absolutely nothing to upgrade your rationality. Literally nothing. Enter the ultimate villain of human cognition, my-side bias. That is the tendency to look at a complex issue and only consider the arguments that favor your side. In psychological studies led by researcher Keith Stanovich, this bias has been put to the test over and over again. They asked subjects to evaluate really controversial topics, and what they found was that people almost exclusively considered arguments backing their pre-existing beliefs. But you want to know the most alarming part? When the researchers measured the participants' intelligence, there was zero link between IQ and resisting this bias. A high IQ provides absolutely zero defense against my-side bias. Intelligent people just use their massive brain power to, well, more confidently justify their own blind spots. The pitch versus the brain. Taking psychology out of the lab and into high-stakes environments. Let's take all this out of the sterile academic lab and drop it into a cinematic, high-pressure situation where every single choice is heavily scrutinized. We're talking about elite sports. Because the muddy, exhausted, high-adrenaline pitch of a World Cup soccer match, it perfectly exposes exactly how our brains betray us when the stakes are sky-high. Take this timeline from the 2018 World Cup. Belgium's star player Romelu Lukaku is out on the pitch, match starts, and then boom. Right in the 31st minute, he delivers a brilliant assist. The crowd goes absolutely wild. But right after that peak moment, an advanced tracking system detected a severe, rapid drop in his engagement and performance. He was exhausted. Yet the human manager left him in the game for way, way longer, completely ignoring this massive, measurable decay. So why did he do that? The manager fell victim to what researchers call decision latency. Basically, this is the temporal gap, the dangerous delay, between when human performance actually drops to critical levels and when an expert finally decides to step in. Human experts suffer from a sort of boiling frog effect. They apply these cognitive filters to deal with the overwhelming chaos of a live match, which means they completely miss gradual, systematic, tactical decay, right up until a catastrophic failure forces their hand. But there's another huge psychological trap at play here, and that is outcome bias. Because Lukaku made that fantastic assist back in the 31st minute, he delivered a highly visible positive outcome. That single stochastic event totally blinded the human manager. The manager felt justified keeping him in, judging the current decision by the warm glow of that past successful outcome. He completely ignored the plunging minute-by-minute real-time metrics, screaming that the player was now a huge liability. 70%. So you might be thinking, okay, humans are flawed. Let's just use artificial intelligence to make these substitution decisions, right? Well, current predictive AI models have a hard ceiling. They hit about a 70% accuracy limit when trying to predict substitutions. Why? Because predictive AI is trained by cloning historical human choices. It literally learns our blind spots, our sunk cost fallacies, and our biases, and then it just repeats them at scale. No way around it. This introduces the hero of our story, prescriptive AI. Unlike predictive AI, which just tries to mimic what a flawed human would do in the future, prescriptive AI acts as a decision auditor in the present. It functions as a cognitive orthotic. Think of it like a mental brace designed to support human limitations. It evaluates the real-time state of the game, completely free from outcome bias, to surface hidden risks and force the human expert to justify their actions based on hard facts, not gut feelings. Now, let's pivot the narrative a bit. From the pitch to the boardroom, we're leaving the physical exhaustion of the soccer pitch and entering the psychological pressure cooker of the corporate boardroom. Because the exact same lack of rationality that ruins a World Cup manager's judgment regularly sabotages corporate directors when they're building teams and making million-dollar business choices. Consider this quote. It's a scenario adapted from the Halpern Critical Thinking Assessment. Imagine a project manager running a focus group on tea. They ask participants to go online and vote between two brands, Tetley and Twinings. Within an hour, they get a 48% response rate, evenly split. The manager triumphantly calls a meeting and declares, half of all Americans buy Tetley and the other half buy Twinings. Now, as a viewer, I challenge you. Can you spot the catastrophic leaps in logic happening here? So, the crucial point here is how a true critical thinker systematically dismantles this impulsively drawn conclusion. The flaws are just massive. The sample size is a single focus group, making it totally unrepresentative of all Americans. Doing it online excludes entire demographics. Forcing a choice between only two brands ignores the rest of the market completely. And most importantly, an online vote tells you absolutely nothing about actual real-world purchasing behavior. A high IQ manager might aggressively defend this data, but a rational critical thinker, they instantly see the structural collapse of the argument. But if intelligence doesn't prevent bias, how do we biologically override our own bad habits? We've seen how smart people fail on the pitch and in the boardroom, right? We know raw intelligence isn't the cure. So if we can't just outsmart a bias, how do we stop our impulses from hijacking our behavior? To really understand this, we've got to look at the core psychological mechanisms of behavior control. It all comes down to a process called emergent activity switching. Think of it like a pressure cooker. First, you have a buildup. An emotional bias or biological drive starts building pressure. Second, you enter a fragile critical phase where you're teetering on the edge of losing control. Third, a tiny trigger snaps, completely reorganizing your brain's focus. Fourth, the focal activity. You act, you snap at your boss, or you make that biased choice, and you do it with unstoppable momentum. And finally, dormancy. The urge is satisfied, and the bias goes back to sleep. And this brilliantly illustrates the exact anatomy of that process. Once those internal drivers build up to that fragile critical phase, it just takes one tiny trigger, a spark, and suddenly, boom, your rational brain shuts down. You cross that threshold, and you are no longer making a logical choice. You're just a passenger to your own psychological momentum. Your bias has officially taken the wheel. Delaying gratification, the marshmallow test, and the illusion of willpower. So how do we stop that trigger? Well, the famous marshmallow test, conducted by Walter Mischel with 4-year-olds, gives us the answer. Kids were left in a room with a treat and told if they just waited, they'd get 2. And what Mischel found was that raw willpower, just staring at the marshmallow and clenching your fists, is a total illusion. Against a hot biological or emotional trigger, sheer determination almost always fails. The data absolutely proves it. Look at this. When the children focused directly on the rewards, their delay time was incredibly low. They gave in almost immediately. But when they used strategies to generate distracting thoughts, their delay time skyrocketed. Fighting bias and impulsive decision-making isn't about grinding your teeth and just trying to be smarter. It's about systematically shifting your attention and completely redesigning your environment before you ever even hit that trigger phase. Cognitive orthotics, AI and frameworks designed to save us from ourselves. Let's move to this and see how it builds our ultimate solution. We cannot rely on raw intelligence or sheer willpower. We need these cognitive orthotics, external structures literally designed to save us from ourselves. In sports, that's prescriptive AI, coldly cutting through a manager's outcome bias. In business, it's rigid frameworks like the Halpern Critical Thinking Assessment that force executives to test their logic rather than jumping to convenient conclusions. They act as the vital guardrails for the human mind. So are your decisions truly rational, or are you just smart enough to confidently justify your biases? We've journeyed through the illusion of the high IQ decision-maker today. We've seen how intelligence without rationality merely builds a stronger fortress around our absolute worst habits. So I'll leave you with this to reflect on as you go about your day. The next time you make a major, confident choice, are your decisions truly rational, or are you just smart enough to confidently justify your own biases? Thanks for joining me on this explainer. Keep questioning everything.